Dr. Theron Williams, best-selling author of The Bible is Black History and 9 other books in the Bible is Black History collection, as well as the critically acclaimed Black Church White Theology, will release his latest book, The Bible is Black History and Beyond, Reimagining Biblical Heritage, Reenvisioning Black Theology, and Reawakening Prophetic Ministry on October 1st, 2023. The Bible is Black History and Beyond, Reimagining Biblical Heritage, Reenvisioning Black Theology, Reawakening Prophetic Ministry. Pre-order your copy today at BibleIsBlackHistory.com or at the Mount Carmel Church bookstore.
Well, praise the Lord. I'm Pastor Jeffrey A. Johnson, Sr. I'm the senior pastor of the Eastern Star Church in Indianapolis, and I am here today with Dr. Theron Williams. Dr. Williams is the pastor of the Mount Carmel Baptist Church in Indianapolis, where he has pastored for the past 36 years. We're here to discuss his latest book, The Bible is Black History and Beyond. So we're very, very excited that God made it happen. I know how hard it is to go and put something in print, but I'm very excited about how God has touched Dr. Williams in this area, and I know it's going to be a blessing to all of us. Dr. Williams, we're just grateful that God is using you in this manner. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, man. Thank you for asking.
Well, I wanted to ask you quite a few questions about the Bible is Black History, because I know you've written The Bible is Black History, and now you've written The Bible is Black History and Beyond, and I'm wondering, why did you feel the need to come back with this piece?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the conversation, Pastor Johnson, pertaining to this book. I wrote The Bible is Black History in 2020. It came out in 2020. And since then, I've had the good fortune to travel the country, travel the world in person, and social media, Zoom and that type of thing, virtual. And I've had lectures and workshops and PowerPoint presentations that I have done. And whether I do them in person or virtually, a whole range of questions always emerge. And I like to, after each presentation, I try to memorialize those questions and my responses to those questions. And I have done that, over these years that I've been doing it. And so I have a database in my computer of all of the questions that were asked and what my responses were. And the other thing is, when I do these workshops, I never have enough time to finish. Normally, when I come to town or do a workshop online or in person, it lasts 3 days. And 3 days is not long enough, or they are every week for 4 weeks. Like, we shared at your church,
right.
Another church in Detroit did the same thing with a church in Chicago, Illinois, and other churches. But mainly, when I do in person, it's 3 days, and there's never enough time. And there are questions that have been raised during the course of these conversations that I've had with people. And I wrote all of those questions down. I wrote my responses. And so I had to produce this Bible is Black History and Beyond, because it deals with the questions that people have asked during, our encounters.
Well, The Bible is Black History and Beyond, your newest release. Whose hands are you hoping to get this in? Who do you want to get this book? Who do you want to read it? And what do you hope they're going to get from The Bible is Black History and Beyond?
Well, the first book, The Bible is Black History, it basically argued that the people of the Bible were people of color, mainly Black people. And so the question is, okay, so what? What does that mean for the modern Black diaspora? How does it affect how we understand the Bible, how we do theology, how we execute ministry in our churches? What does it do for Black Christians to know that the Bible emerged out of a Black experience? And so I want everybody to read it. Those who are interested in the Bible being the history of a Black people and how it impacts us today. There's a whole lot. Because, okay, the Bible is Black history, so now what does that mean? how does it affect me? Does it give me bragging rights to say, okay, people who look like me were the biblical heroes and the biblical heroine? Does it only, am I only doing this for bragging rights, or do I want it to impact how I understand the Word of God and how I approach ministry?
Well, I know one of the things that you mentioned is reimagining biblical heritage. And I guess since you're talking about reimagining, then you believe that we've already imagined something.
Yes.
And what we've imagined may not be what biblical history is.
Right.
So what do you, give us some kind of working definition of biblical heritage from your perspective, and why do you feel like we need to because I grew up in the church, I've heard preaching all my life, I've heard all kind of pastors from different backgrounds, different cultures, different colors, different denominations, and now you're telling me you need to reimagine your biblical heritage. What is biblical heritage? Why do I need to take another look at it?
Oh, because we have been co-opted, our consciousness have been colonized by Euro thinking. They have imagined for us what biblical heritage is. White evangelicalism is the default theological position for much of Christianity in the West. We are white evangelicals. We embrace that by default. Uncritically, we've never checked it. We've never challenged it. We've just taken it. And so they told us what biblical heritage looks like. They show us Charlton Heston. That's Moses. They show us white Jesus, and that's Jesus. Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel painted the ceiling, and he has this image of white God reaching out to Adam. You know, so when we imagine biblical heritage, we imagine white people at the center of that heritage. And so biblical heritage, as we understand it in the West, revolves around whiteness. And it outflows from the age of enlightenment in the 16th and 17th, 18th, 19th century, the age of enlightenment in Europe, where they define for the entire world what biblical heritage is, and we've never challenged it. We've just accepted it. So I'm challenging us, let's reimagine biblical heritage from the perspective that the people of the Bible were people of color, and central to that heritage is the reality that this thing emerged from a black community called the Israelites. People of color read the Bible as outsiders. We are reading, as we understand it, the history of a people who are different from we are, because this culture has convinced us that the Bible is a book written by white people, about white people, and for white people. And so we are reading the Bible story as outsiders looking in. White people tend to read it as insiders because they're convinced that it is their story. Now, when I wrote The Bible is Black History, I got thousands of reviews from people. People sent me emails, and you can look on my website, thebibleisblackhistory.com. You can look at the Kindle website, where it has all of these comments about the book and reviews about the book, on Amazon reviews and all of that. And there are so many people who are saying, thank you for writing this book. I now read the Bible differently. You know, now that I know that people of the Bible were basically black people, I read the Bible story differently. I read it now as an insider. So there is a disconnect, whether we are aware of it or not. That disconnect has become normalized so that we read the Bible from the outside in rather than from the inside out. I had a young man who wrote me a letter. He had gone away to college, and when he came home, his mother gave him my book, The Bible of Black History, as part of his Christmas gift. And he wrote me a letter. He said, I didn't intend to read it. I'm in college. My mother gave it to me a year ago. I'm now a senior. I'm taking a religion course as a prerequisite to graduate. It's a mandatory class, and I didn't plan on reading your book, but I had to write a paper, and your book sat on my shelf for over a year until I had to write a paper for my religion course. I picked up your book only to see if I can find something in it that can help me write my paper. He said, I started reading your book, I couldn't put it down. I didn't like the Bible, I didn't like church. I only went because my mother told me. The Bible was not identifiable to me. I couldn't identify with it because it wasn't my story. He said, but after reading your book, I see it differently. And then he put at the end jokingly, had I read this earlier, I would have considered going to seminary. But I've been accepted into med school, and he put laugh out loud. But the point is that he had been reading the Bible as an outsider. When he found out that black folk were the main characters of the Bible, he started reading it as an insider and was able to identify with the biblical story better.
Now, and I really appreciate, Dr. Williams, you coming over to the Eastern Star Church in Indianapolis and walking through the Bible as Black history, and definitely want to have you back to deal with the Bible as Black history and beyond. We know that 3 or 4 times is not enough to get the information across to people. But I know you travel in the country and you preaching and teaching different parts of the world. And as you explain to them about the Bible as Black history, and now the Bible as Black history and beyond, I know you're hearing, what difference does it make? Because I started learning it when I was in my late 20s. I heard Kane Hope Felder for the first time, Dr. Kane Hope Felder. And he was troubling biblical waters back then. Mm-hmm. And so that changed my perspective and my outlook. And so I started preaching and teaching some of it. And I'm hearing, what difference does it make? And I didn't do it at the level you're doing it. I didn't write 9 or 10 books, and I didn't travel the country trying to get this into people, but I know that there's some pushback from blacks and whites when you talk about this. I know that there are those that they want to talk about integration. That's what it's integration, so that black people and white people worshiping in the same place. But they don't want to deal with liberation, freedom for everybody. So what's your response to those who are not as accepted as the young man that's on his way to medical school that had this this spiritual aha moment? What's your response to that?
Well, I mean, people contend, because I've done this, at churches like you've pointed out, and they leave the session saying, why won't you just teach the Bible? And I tell them, I am teaching the Bible. This is Bible study. We're studying it from a perspective that you're not used to. It doesn't mean that we're not having Bible study. But we have been so colonized in our consciousness to embrace white interpretation of the Bible as if that's the only interpretation, and anything that deviates from that, we view it as heretical, which is dangerous. Because white evangelicalism has a stranglehold, in my opinion, on the black church. I mean, some of our greatest African-American pastors are consumers of white evangelicalism. And I argue in the previous book, Black Church, White Theology, that one of the functions of white evangelicalism is to hold in place systems of oppression and domination. It's to provide theological justification for hierarchical domination, where black people and people of color have been held at the bottom of that hierarchy. When you have black theology, liberation theology, and other theology, womanist theology, these types of theologies emerge from people who are at the bottom of that social hierarchy. And one of the salient features of each of these theological constructions is to collapse systems of domination, to bring about equality in all people. The salient feature of white evangelicalism is to hold that hierarchy in place, to keep white privilege at the top. And so when the black church consumes and propagates this white theological construction in their black churches, they have become complicit in their own oppression. And so it has to do with decolonizing the consciousness of our people. And you're swimming against the current because everybody is not ready for it. Because the way we have our theology right now is nice, it's neat, it's packaged, it's you don't have to struggle with it, you don't wrestle against it. Here it is, we got it, and that's the end of it. And then when you have people like James Cone, Kano Felder, and others coming, interrupting that, you're creating a problem because they now have to go back and rethink their theology. Nobody wants to do that because it requires work. Because we think we got it, now it's blown to bits, and now we have to put it back together and put it back together in a way that contradicts what we have been conditioned to believe. We don't like to do that. We're comfortable in where we are. And so I wrestle with that ever since I wrote the Bible is Black History. I've been wrestling back and forth with that. I don't expect anything differently from my white brothers and sisters. I don't expect it. I mean, you've got some great white scholars. You got Robert P. Jones, who wrote White Too Long, and he got another book out. You got other critics, Robin DiAngelo, who wrote this piece called White Fragility. You have others who have written about this problem of white domination and white supremacy who are white people. You've got great scholars like Walter Brueggemann, who is against it. You've got Walter Wink, all of those guys who have written about this white domination and hierarchicalism and how we can break it and break free. But there are a very few that I expect something different from, but for the mass, for the majority of people, my white brothers and sisters, I don't expect anything. You know, I'm going after black people, and my goal is to help decolonize their consciousness so that they can begin to understand that the Bible story is their story.
Right. Now, in the book we're discussing today, the Bible is Black history and beyond. You not only address imagining biblical heritage, but you also spend a significant period of time re-envisioning Black theology. So from your perspective, when you talk about Black theology versus white evangelical theology, I know you dealt with the hierarchy piece, but you want to expand on it a little more to help us to understand your perspective on Black theology.
Well, Black theology as it has been constructed, James Cone is recognized as the father of Black theology because he's the one who approached it in an academic way, in an academic setting. But prior to James Cone, you had Nat Turner, you had Harriet Tubman, you had Frederick Douglass, you had Henry Highland Garnett, you had a whole range of Black people who were practicing Black theology.
Right.
But they were not writing it, in the way that James Cone captured it and wrote it. The starting point for Black theology is Black suffering at the hands of white domination. That's the starting point of Black theology. Black theologians don't deal with the Black ethnicity of the people of the Bible. Their starting point is Black suffering, particularly in America, at the hands of white supremacy. I contend that starting point needs to move back to the Bible because the people of the Bible were Black, and part of their oppression was their ethnic identity, which includes their complexion. So I'm contending, especially for this generation. Now, we've got enough theological analysis. James Cone, Wilmore, you've got J.D. Otis Roberts, you've got John Kinney, you've got Jerome C. Roth, we've got plenty of theological analysis. What's missing is connecting the people of the Bible with Black folk in terms of our racial kinship. So at the center of our Black theological constructions we have to somehow include the reality that the people of the Bible were black people, especially for this generation. This generation not only want to see a theological connection with the people of the Bible, they want to see a genetic connection to the people of the Bible. They want to see themselves as a part of the God story. And the black church has been moving at glacier-like pace, addressing that reality. All the while, you got black folk defecting from the church in search of a theological position or religion that makes them a part of the God story. That's the emergence of the black Hebrew Israelites. They want to see themselves as a part of the God story. That's the emergence back in the 50s and 60s with the Nation of Islam, where Allah is involved in the lives of black folk in America. That's how he's understood. You got black folks who are reverting back to the African tradition religion, the religions that our forebears practiced before they were brought to the United States. And it seems as if the black church doesn't get it. We don't understand why this defection is happening, because we refuse to talk about the ethnicity of black people in the Bible and connect it with who we are today.
Now, one of the things in your book, The Bible is Black History and Beyond, that really stood out to me. It's very enlightening, very informative book from cover to cover. And I appreciate your scholarship. And I know how much time you have spent to put this together, and it was worth it. But one of the things that stood out to me is as you argue about the black Hebrews in the Bible and how the Bible is black history, is when the Hebrew people ended up in Egypt. And of course, they were there for 430 years in slavery. But when they first got there, they didn't go there with 600,000 men, as the book of Exodus teaches us, and more than 2 million people as when they came out. They didn't go in with 2 million people. They came out with 2 million people. But when they went in, you were saying it wasn't that many. And then they started intermingling and intermarriages. And can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, they went in Genesis chapter 50 with 70 people into Egypt, into Africa. Genesis chapter 50. One of the things I contend going in, they were black people, because I argue Abraham was black. He's from the land of the Chaldeans, and Chaldeans were black people. There is evidence that they were black people. You can look at their paintings. You can look at different renditions and renderings of ancient Chaldean people. They were, I contend, they were black people.
And where they lived.
And where they lived.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you look at the name of Abraham. You know, Abram means father of a multitude. Ham means black or hot. Abram's name was Abram when we first meet him in the Bible, but when he found out he would be the father of a multitude, Ham was suffixed to Abram. That changed the definition of Abraham's name. If Ham means black or hot, and Abram means father of a multitude, you put those two together, what does it mean? Black father of a multitude, which could suggest the racial makeup, and I say racial makeup advisedly because I describe the whole question of race at the beginning of the book. But suffice it to say, it reflected the color of the Chaldeans, of which Abraham was a part. So I contend that the 70 descendants of Abraham, with Jacob particularly, there were 70 of them. They went into Egypt. They stayed there for 430 years. On the other side, they come out of Egypt 2 million strong. What color do you think they were after 430 years? After that, they spend 40 years in the wilderness. The Bible doesn't talk about it, but the Midianites were also lived out there, and these were black folks, lived out there for 40 years. Then they went into Canaan, who were the descendants of Ham, another black population. So from the book of Judges through the end of 1 Samuel, is the era of the judges, which is 410 years. So you got 430 plus 40 plus 410, that's 880 years. The first 880 years, they went into Africa. They intermixed, intermingled, intermarried, miscegenated with black folks for 880 years. What color do you think they were at the beginning of the monarchy with King Saul? So you can look at us. We've been here 400 years, and many of our ancestors came over with zero European ancestry, zero. Today, the average American descendant of slave has 15% European genetic makeup after 400 years. This is with European and Africans being restricted from intermingling and intermixing with each other, miscegenation. Just imagine if there was no restriction on black people and white people marrying.
Right.
It would be much higher. Our European content would be, European genetic content would be much higher. There were no, it wasn't that much prohibition. Of course, Moses told them, no, y'all don't need to be intermarrying and intermingling, but they ignored Moses.
And that wasn't racial.
And it wasn't racial.
Yeah.
It wasn't racial at all. So these were black people, and I don't understand how people cannot see that. But one of the questions we get, Pastor, is if the Bible is black history, if these people were black people, where did the European Jews come from? What is their story? How did they get in it? And that's one of the things that I deal with the European Jewry in our book to try to help shed some light on that.
Yeah. One area I don't want to leave out of here is in your book, The Bible is Black History and Beyond. You talk about Reawakening Prophetic Ministry. Again, help us to kind of understand what prophetic ministry is from your perspective, and when did it go to sleep?
Yeah.
And how do we reawaken that prophetic ministry?
Yeah. Well, I start from this premise that the ministry of Moses, inherent in Moses' ministry, is what I call a prophetic impulse. That is, the ministry of Moses was built on speaking abrasively to the powers that be, prophetic abrasive pronouncements against the regime, the Pharaonic regime, for holding the people of Israel in bondage for 430 years. Yeah. So inherent in Moses' ministry as that leader is a prophetic impulse, because his ministry emerged out of oppression. The ministry of Jesus emerged out of oppression. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me. Luke 4. So his ministry emerged out of oppression, and inherent in the ministry of Jesus is a prophetic impulse. He spoke in criticism, abrasive criticism, to the regime, to the Roman Empire that held the Jews captive and colonized them and dominated them. So Jesus' ministry emerged out of oppression. Moses' ministry emerged out of oppression. Both of those ministries inherent had a prophetic impulse. The black church in America emerged out of oppression as well. This is not to say that the first encounter that Africans had with the gospel is when they were brought here in chains in 1619. That couldn't be the case. It goes all the way back. Black people have always had the gospel. But the black church in America is its latest iteration, and it too emerged out of oppression. So just as Moses' ministry emerged out of oppression, and it had an inherent prophetic impulse, just as Jesus' ministry emerged out of oppression, it too had a prophetic impulse. the black church also emerged out of oppression and should have a prophetic impulse. But white evangelicalism has robbed the black church of its prophetic impulse. And now we don't have it anymore. So there are people in the black church who say we ought to stay out of politics, that we ought not be speaking out against injustice, because that's not who we are. We ought to just preach the gospel as if the gospel is something other than speaking prophetically against systems of oppression and domination. So they have redefined for us what gospel is. And we have taken it uncritically. We believe them when they say the gospel is about the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, period. It is, but it's beyond that. Because Jesus was the first gospel preacher, he never preached the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Never. He preached liberation to the poor. He preached the recovery of sight to the blind. Not only did he preach it, but his ministry embodied it. So he went about practicing the pronouncements that he proclaimed. It was flushed out in his ministry. There was a time in history when the black church did have a prophetic ministry. Lerone Bennett, in his book Before the Mayflower, talks about 250 slave revolts or rebellions. 250. And most of those were led by Christian preachers who had a prophetic impulse. They spoke against the regime that held our people in slavery and then embodied it, whether it was Nat Turner or others. They embodied their theological belief. They saw themselves as prophets called from God. They spoke out against the regime that held them in slavery, and then they tried to do something about it. And I outlined that in one of my other books. They tried to do something about it. Now that's the beginning of black theology and black prophetic ministry, which should be inherent in all black churches. Whether the black church was founded a long time ago or whether it was founded yesterday, because all black churches have one thing in common. They are mostly made up of American descendants of slaves, the ADOS generation, the people of the ADOS, the American descendants of slaves. So if we are descendants of slaves, that presupposes that we are on the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. Of course, you do have black billionaires and black millionaires and black wealthy people. Overall, we're still at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. So our churches are filled with people who are at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. We are still emerging out of oppression. So if we are emerging out of oppression, how did we lose our prophetic impulse? It's been taken from us, and we have to recover it.
Well, I know we're going to have to wrap this up, but I want to thank you for hearing God's voice and operating according to God's Holy Spirit and caring enough about people to write the Bible is Black history and beyond. I pray that it gets in the right hands to the right people and get the truth out there. I believe if we know the truth, then the truth will set you free. The last thing I'll say, and then you can wrap this up for us, is I was at a conference in Orlando, predominantly white. It had probably a couple of thousand Christian leaders who were there, and a young black pastor was on program, and he was name dropping, and he name dropped a pastor in California, a white pastor one of the largest churches in the nation. If I called his name, you would know who he was, but I'm not really concerned about his name. I'm concerned about the theology. He said the young black preacher said he spent a couple hours with this very significant voice in Christianity. And so he asked the white pastor, what is it, what advice you have for me in my ministry? If there's a young pastor, what should I be doing? And he was told, take care of your wife, take care of your children, and that's all you need to do. And it was so far from what Jesus modeled before. I was hungry, you fed me. I was outdoors, you found me housing. I was in prison, and you got reentry programs to get me reacclimated to the community. That all these things that Jesus talked about with a social expression of faith. I was sick. You found me some affordable health care. So all these social expressions that Jesus had, not just for you and your wife and your children, but to come alongside the marginalized, to come alongside those who are poor, who really need this the most. But yet we have it in our minds that as long as I take care of myself personally and my immediate family, then I have done all I need to do. How do we get that out of these people, man, to get this thing back on track for that prophetic ministry?
We are swimming against the stream, and it is going to take a long, arduous, sustained effort to, like I said a few times in this conversation, to decolonize the consciousness of our brothers and sisters, and that used to anger me, but it doesn't anymore. I have pity and compassion and patience because they are victims of white supremacy. Their minds have been corrupted. It has been taken over by this white evangelicalism that's rooted in self-preservation, is rooted in self without a social expression. So as long as I'm preaching personal salvation, as much as that's needed in our churches, as long as I'm preaching that, I don't need to have a social expression of the gospel, which is sad, which is why, I labor so diligently in this area, because I feel like somebody needs to say something, someone needs to put books out that the average pew member can read. You got other scholars who are doing writing and who have done writing, but the average pew member can't understand it. They can't wrap their minds around it. So I have taken it and tried to put it in reach of the average person of average intelligence sitting in that pew who can open this book and start reading it and get it.
Well, we want to thank Dr. Theron Williams for all of his effort and energy to put the truth out there. You should know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. So thank you for The Bible is Black History and Beyond. Reimagining Biblical Heritage, Reenvisioning Black Theology, Reawakening Prophetic Ministry by Dr. Theron Williams. Y'all, you want to get this. I know you have in your heart and your mind, you know the Bible is Black history, but you don't know how to articulate it. You don't know how to pass that truth on to your family, to your friends, your coworkers, and to those in the community. And so this is a way to get that done, to get the knowledge and to be able to pass it on. So make sure you go and get it, read it, and then pass it on. We appreciate you and we love you.
Dr. Theron Williams, best-selling author of The Bible is Black History and 9 other books in the Bible is Black History collection, as well as the critically acclaimed Black Church White Theology, will release his latest book, The Bible is Black History and Beyond, Reimagining Biblical Heritage, Reenvisioning Black Theology, and Reawakening Prophetic Ministry on October 1st, 2023. The Bible is Black History and Beyond, Reimagining Biblical Heritage, Reenvisioning Black Theology, Reawakening Prophetic Ministry. Pre-order your copy today at BibleIsBlackHistory.com or at the Mount Carmel Church bookstore.